Ooh. Hello and good evening to the Environment and Transportation Committee's Natural Resources, Agriculture, and Open Spaces Subcommittee. We will be going through one, two, three, four, about 6 bills today. Uh, Hopefully in good discussion. We will go ahead and begin with HB 397, the Maryland Agricultural and Resource Industry Development Corporation Oyster Shucking House Loan Program. Is Patrick with us?
I'm not sure they're finished.
Ah, all right. Well, let's go to HB 425, Kristen.
Yep. Can we just to go over it?
Yes, ma'am.
This bill is basically just removing auctioneers from the definition of those required to obtain a boat dealer's license.
Double check. And I see that Natural Resources was favorable.
Yep. No amendments.
No amendments. I see Emily Wilson on the line. Do you want to add anything, Emily, to this?
I don't need to add. I think it's just common sense, honestly.
Okay.
Move the bill. Move the bill.
There's a second. Second. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor of moving the bill favorably, with a favorable report to the committee, signify by saying aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposition? Okay. All right, we will move to let's do okay. We still got I see Patrick's here. You made it. Patrick, can we jump to if you need a minute, HB 397?
Yeah, no problem. House Bill 397 is the marked Bidco bill. Simply loosens the requirements for getting loans. It eliminates the 10,000 cap for each seasonal job, therefore putting the seasonal jobs at 25,000 like the full-time year-round jobs are. And then it it reduces the amount of years you have to be in the dealer business from 5 to 3. And both the department and Marbidco have said that at least right now at the moment, this would make 2 different seafood dealers eligible for the loans. Only one person has received it so far.
Right. Are there any questions or clarifications needed around this oyster shucking house loan program?
Madam Chair, I'd move the bill.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor of moving HB 397 favorably to the entire committee, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? Okay, any abstentions? Okay. Bill moves with a favorable report. Let's go to HB 446, please.
Okay. Well, this is the bill that current department DNR regulations basically prohibit frontlining for blue cat south of the Bay Bridge for bycatch reasons and for user conflict reasons. We can't seem to find the bill, and the bill just basically repeals those regs and says, that the regulations can't prohibit fishing in the main stem of the Chesapeake Bay south of the Bay Bridge.
Right, and I remember from DNR's testimony that they actually have, as of February 7th, 2025, they are the department is soliciting applications for a pilot program to test the feasibility of allowing trot lines in that particular area of the bay, based on recommendations, of course, of the Invasive Catfish Advisory Committee.
Right, and that's in a press release that was sent to the subcommittee, the committee. It's on their website.
Right, and I think they're saying they're gonna do the pilot to see if it's if the information on the harvest to gather information on the efficiency of the harvest, bycatch, and a user conflict. So we can discuss it further. I see Delegate Ruth has her hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wondered if they're planning a pilot on this, if it's premature to require them to allow this before we have the results of the pilot.
I mean, I certainly would agree. I mean, and we could certainly open up for discussion, but I do respectfully, I see what the sponsors attempting to do, right? Like we have this invasive species, and we should be able to, at any time, at any place, try to, catch them and eat them, and put them on the market. But it does have it does have some hiccups. Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a couple of things. First of all, I appreciate what Delegate Ruth said about the pilot, but with all due respect, we're the legislature. If we feel like we want to go ahead because it is an invasive species, we don't have to wait for their pilot. I'm just saying that up front. I'm not saying
That's fair.
necessarily support that, but I think that, we should defer to the department sometimes, but I also think that we don't have to. The other thing I was going to say was we could amend the bill to say, pending, we could defer to we could delay the implementation of the bill until the pilot is completed. So we could defer to the pilot, but then put the legislation in place so that if the pilot shows that it's a good thing to do, that the bill would then be implemented. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Right. So, with all due respect, I do take departmental information into consideration, because at the end of the day, they will have to either monitor and/or enforce, right? And I know one of the if I remember correctly, one of the concerns was like with a trot line, you're going to get a little bit of everything. And I think the trot line doesn't, for the folks who do this, say if I'm getting this information wrong, if they catch anything outside of just a catfish, it's not detrimental enough where they can, take the fish off and throw them back in. So it wouldn't, I know it was a CBF's concern that they would be catching other species that we don't want them to catch in these particular water. So again, that's why it's up for discussion. Delegate Foley, do you have anything else?
Yeah, the other thing I was going to say, and I forgot to add this onto my comments. I think another option for us, if we wanted to, would be to codify the pilot. So we could codify the pilot in our legislation, if we wanted to do that. I'm not necessarily proposing that. We're discussing the bill, so I'm kind of throwing that out there as a possible option.
I appreciate that. Delegate Ziegler and then Delegate Jacobs.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was a little concerned about the Chesapeake Bay Trust testimony, but then it occurred to me, but then the blue catfish are eating all the other fish.
There it is, too. Right, exactly. Well, and they say in here, in the areas where the blue catfish populations have been established, catfish make up about approximately 75% of the total fish weight of all fishing inhabiting the river.
Crazy.
Where they're talking about. But again, I think I understand what the sponsor, I think, is trying to do. If it's evasive, it's evasive, and we should get it where we should get it. But again, up for discussion. Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The one thing I want to say is when the trot line bill was passed many years ago, Tony O'Donnell was on the committee. He had some concerns about the bycatch. I can tell you where these bluefish are, especially down the lower part of the bay, they're consuming at least 80% of anything that's in the body of water that they're in. They're so aggressive and they're eating so much. that now that they've gotten to above 15 pounds in the down the lower bay, they're starting to eat oyster spat. So, you know, you can be as cautious as you want. I don't think bycatch is a big issue whatsoever because when they travel in their herd, there's not everything else is leaving. They're not commingling. So I understand the concern of bycatch as far as other areas may be, but I don't think this is an issue where bycatch is something that we should sit back another year on and let them eat that much more, especially in the lower bay where they're eating oyster spat. And that we didn't know until last year. So they grow so fast that, you know, they're just doing ungodly amounts of damage in this bay. And we shouldn't be fooling around with them at all. We should be doing every measure possible to get rid of these things. In my opinion, they're invasive and they're doing a lot of damage.
Here, here. Delegate Stein. I'm sorry, Delegate Jacobs, were you done with that? All right, Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps if we wanted to sort of look to a compromise, we could pass Delegate Morgan's bill, but put a sunset on it with an evaluation by DNR.
I think that's
Yeah, just a thought, like for
okay.
2 years or something. And
I agree with that.
Okay. Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And listening to Delegate Jacobs, I'm convinced, and also Delegate Ziegler made a good point. And I think the sunset's a good idea, but I'm convinced. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, so just so that I'm hearing what we're all saying, we all agree that I guess DNR should be doing this kind of pilot, and they're going to do it and they're going to get their results. And in the meantime, we could pass this bill with a sunset and we can determine what the date is. So when it's effective and essentially when the sunset is, and then given that it's you know, a licensee that would, you know, it's not just anybody. We potentially, I don't know if there's data that we could be able to gain through this. Actually, is Emily still on? I have a quick question.
I'm here. I also have Sarah Widman from our Fishing and Boating Services.
Okay. Is Sarah better to answer this question?
Depending on the question, but probably.
Well, I guess the question would be, you know, the subcommittee has a desire to move the bill, and again, to Delegate Foley's point, yes, we're the legislature, we can do what we need to do. But I want to make sure if this is something we do with a sunset, is there a way, and given the fact that you're going to do this pilot, is there a way to be able to collect data in doing so if we allow this provision?
Delegate voice, I can weigh in if you'd like.
Yes, please, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, so the pilot is one of the goals is to collect the data to figure out what works and what we can do and where we can open safely. There is a pupping ground of a shark situation that we're a little concerned with on the eastern shore side.
Got it.
But that's kind of the point of the pilot. So I'm just trying to marry in my head, if we went ahead and just opened it all up, I don't know if anyone would want to join the pilot because they could just go.
Well, that's true too. And we can also make it so that it's effective at the close of the data due, right? Isn't that supposed to be due in November
Think so. I'd have to
of the
look back at
same year?
website. Yeah.
I mean, either depending on the results and or to move forward, we could, after the pilot, see what it says, and then from there create I guess the limitation from December, from when these results are due until whatever those 2 years are, and then go from there.
Yeah, I mean, if there was something with the results of the pilot and then opening it according to the results of the pilot, I think that would mesh the two together.
Okay, Delegate Jacobs.
Yeah, I was, and Sarah, you best probably to answer this. I mean, the pilot, the department's going to determine how many people will be permitted to do it in what locations are allowed to do it in. It just won't be like willy-nilly go out in the bay and go set them where you want. I think the pilot's pretty regulated if I understand it correctly. Is that right?
Yeah, that's my understanding of it.
Yeah. So I think it's pretty structured into, being pretty precise on what information you're trying to gather in certain areas. So, I just don't think we should be fooling around with these things too much, especially in the lower bay.
Okay. Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for letting me weigh in so much on this.
Sure.
But listening to Delegate Jacobs, and I totally agree with him on the, waiting, I think, makes a really good point about us not waiting. Is there a way that we can actually make the pilot the bill? So
No, I'd rather not do that because if they're already going to do it and I don't want to legislate what somebody's already going to do.
well, except that Delegate Jacobs' point was that the pilot was going to be about how many licenses they're going to give out and where they're going to do it. And so why can't that be incorporated into the bill? And then the bill takes effect based on, as I think it was Emily said, that based on the results of the pilot, then the bill gets implemented fully based on the results of the pilot.
So I guess we could say the bill can refer to it, but I'm not interested in putting the pilot in the bill since it's already happening. We can legislate that this bill moves ahead based on the results of that. I don't know. I could be wrong. I'm happy to be overruled, but I think it's already
I'm
happening.
not interested in overruling you.
I mean, you can. I mean, it's a committee. Go ahead, Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first of all, a question for Sarah.
Mhm.
You had said there's a concern about shark popping, I think you said. Do I have that right?
Yes, you have that right, Delegate.
Is that in a particular area? Can we open this up more generally, but restrict it from that one area?
So that was one thing that we played around with, whether or not we want to test in that area at all or leave it completely open for testing to see what happens. We're trying to work with, because it's protected sharks, we're trying to work with our biologists and managers over the sharks to figure out, what the intercept might be on that side of the bay.
Thank you. And then question really for Delegate Jacobs, I guess, maybe, or Sarah, either one who can answer this, but I don't understand. So I guess my question is, how do seasons play into this? If the pilot is supposed to end in November, like, are there particular seasons that the blue catfish that this can be done? Would it then be delayed until spring or something along those lines, or could it start immediately after the pilot?
I can try my best to answer that because I don't know exactly how our managers are foreseeing the pilot running at the end and how we transfer that into regulation if we did it that way. But so I know they wanted to start it, and they're closing the applications on the 20th because they want to pick people and get people out immediately, and run it through kind of that whole season time through the summer into late, I guess, early fall, late summer, so that we could get that data and figure out how to proceed. That was the kind of track of what we would do under the pilot.
And Delegate Ruth and Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong. There is no season for blue cat. You can catch it anytime.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, correct, Patrick. There's not a designated season. There's just kind of heightened times when, people tend to catch more of them than other times. But yeah, they're here year round, and we don't have a season because, as you all know, like, we're happy to get rid of them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Ruth. Delegate Jacobs.
They're a little tougher to catch when it's hot. They like to get in cool holes, and in the fall and the winter, you catch a lot of blue catfish. So if it's a tougher time to catch them, it's when it's hot, not when it's cooler. So all I'm saying, I mean, if we've got a pilot that has an end date, I mean, you could delay the start time of a bill.
Well, one or two, we can, after after they get their results, we can legislate that they regulate the results plus what we want in the bill. So that's another option as well.
Well, I just think that, we should not be not going after these things by all means possible. And I can tell you, this same conversation took place the day the Trotline bill passed when Tony O'Donnell was on the committee, probably 8, 9 years ago. And he brought up the issue of bycatch, and I told him then, I said, Tony, there's not a lot of bycatch where these blue cats are. They're kind of like a herd of Pac-Man, Remember those, don't you, Regina?
Yes, sir, I do.
Right.
So I
And
think there
they're
is
getting bigger every day.
bigger every day. I think there is consensus that that we do want to do something, and we do want more possibilities to catch catfish, blue catfish, in the mainstream of the main stem of the Chesapeake Bay, south of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. And so why don't we work on what that amendment language looks like as it relates to the pilot, right? The pilot is over in November. And that essentially this would take place potentially, I think Delegate Stein said it best. I'm forgetting already that essentially the bill can be implemented essentially post results of the pilot. I don't know. We can work on that language, Patrick, or any other amendment ideas folks have that would help include the fact that we're going to have these results in the fall. Yes, no, maybe so. Okay. And if you have amendment thoughts or ideas, please send them to Patrick, and Patrick, we can work through that as it relates to yes, no. Is that okay, Patrick?
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Oh, okay. Okay. So our plan is that we're going to, hopefully by next week, we'll have this back on the schedule, that we will amend it, amend the bill, and then go from there. So we're looking at a potential sunset or an incorporation of this pilot. That's okay. I know it's late, y'all. Let's go. If we're good, can we move on to HB 494?
Well, that's just a hold anyway.
Yes, but just to remind folks of that this bill is among a larger package of bills regarding service members language and bills to codify that it is consistent across all parts of the Maryland Code. That's correct. Is that correct?
That is correct. And we have 2 of the bills. This is one of them. The other is transportation related. Excuse me. But the bills in HCO are taking the lead, and the language has to be smoothed out and be the same among all of them. So whatever amendments they do, we will look at and probably take. So we're waiting on them.
Wait on HGO. Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe I'm mixing up some bills, but Patrick, isn't there also like including public health worker or public health service?
Yes.
Bills as well, right? So
Who are under the military.
right. So it's not just armed forces like Coast Guard, it's also public health services.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to Kristen. Let's talk HB 513.
Sure. House Bill 513 is establishing restrictions on the keeping of roosters. It would prohibit beginning January 1st, 2027, a person who keeps roosters that are maintained individually and kept movement constrained through the use of an enclosure or tether from keeping more than 5 roosters per acre on a single property or keeping more than a total of 25 roosters on a single property unless they're otherwise authorized by the department. These prohibitions would not apply to a commercial poultry producer, a public school or non-public school that receives state funds, a government-operated animal shelter, an animal welfare organization, and certain members of 4-H or Future Farmers of America, on proof of their membership. There are penalty provisions provided in the bill. There's language authorizing the department to work in cooperation with a local animal control or law enforcement officer to enforce the bill. And there's also, general construction language indicating that the department is not required to conduct additional inspections beyond inspections required by law as a result of the bill.
Thank you, Kristen. Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How is this bill different from last year's? Were there changes to it from?
I actually had a compare document, but I don't have it out. Let me see if I have that handy. It's very similar.
Can I ask Jennifer Bevan Dangle if she knows the answer to that?
That would be probably the quickest way to figure it out.
Madam Chair, is that okay?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you, Delegate. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. So the most significant difference is that we centered how the birds are housed or maintained, because we heard the concerns from the subcommittee last year. We wanted to ensure that just sort of your backyard average, chicken raiser who might have eggs or meat birds in their backyard or just breed because they like the birds, that they weren't going to be swept up in this. So on page 3, lines 9 through 12, we added this language about the birds being maintained individually and movement constrained. We've spoke with a lot of law enforcement personnel about, what really sets apart a game yard from a farm. And this movement constraint, the birds are tethered, they're kept in very small cages, they're housed in these, small dark enclosures to make them feisty. That's very unique to these game yards. So that really is how we know these are cockfighting breeders, not your sort of average chicken owner.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so, discussion, because I had a lot of questions and I still do. Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly understand the intent about, adding the additional language that Jennifer just referred to, kept movement constrained through the use of an enclosure or tether. But, I guess the reference to an enclosure, aren't roosters or chickens, sometimes kept in backyard pens anyway?
Yeah.
Or, on-farm pens. So I guess enclosure to me sounds not terribly specific.
I would agree to that as well. I'm sorry, Delegate Stein, are you looking for an answer from Jennifer?
Sure. Yes.
Okay.
That would be great.
Thank you, Delegate. We would be happy to tighten up that word. The difficulty that we had in coming up with this word, sometimes it's an igloo, sometimes it's sort of a cobbled together bits of plywood and some wire. So we struggled to find a word that was more specific than enclosure, but still encompassed all the sort of types of small containment units. But I can go back to our law enforcement partners and ask them if there's a better term for that. Absolutely.
That would be great.
Anything else, Delegate Stein?
Nope. Thank you.
You're welcome. Delegate Jacobs.
Yeah, I think that containment unit's real important because there's a lot of people make a lot of makeshift type of housing for chickens, they're not all elaborate chicken coops. So sometimes they make them out of who knows what in their backyard. But one of my other concerns, and I don't have the bill in front of me, I apologize, but is there anything in it that refers to this being unregistered flocks versus registered flocks?
I don't think so.
I'm looking
But
at.
under current law, you would have to register, but certainly I wouldn't expect these folks to be registering their flock, but that language is not in the bill, I don't think.
Well, that's a concern right there. Thank you.
Well, so this is something I think I brought up during the hearing. I'm sorry, Delegate Stein, do you have another question? I just want to make sure I didn't miss you. During committee is the question that I continue to have about that is that, and I don't know if the information was gathered and sent, but essentially, how many jurisdictions already have either a licensing or a permitting process in place to have kind of like your backyard chickens, and the very, professor type Google search that I've done, essentially says that the most places, if they have them, they have the licensing or they have the permitting, but they more than likely, more often than not, don't include roosters. And so my concern, and again, I understand this stems from one big case, is that if at the local level, there is a process where you have to license or register, and then you have a certain amount that you are allowed to have or not have, and the type, you then would also have to register with the Department of Agriculture. So they would have that information on both ends, not only for themselves, but and for the local jurisdiction. So I still kind of struggle with the idea that we need kind of like more information. And I understand that there are places that don't kind of regulate chickens in the backyard. So after Delegate Foley, I'd like if the Department of Ag is on here to really talk about the registration process. Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to go back to the enclosure question, which perhaps, I mean, I took the bill to mean when you talked about enclosures, roosters being like segregated and enclosed by themselves. I don't know whether that makes a difference or whether if we clarified that in the bill, whether that would address some of the concerns. That's just a comment.
Oh, okay, Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Foley, if that, keeping the roosters to themselves is an indicator that they're only being, kept for fighting, then sure. But I don't know the practice. I don't know whether otherwise they would be kept away from chickens because, because they tend to be maybe more feisty. I just don't know.
Delegate Baker, and then if we can get MDA.
Yeah, I'm going to be real fast.
You don't have to be
think-
fast. Take your time.
No, I want to be fast. Enclosure should reference some sort of a cubic foot, my opinion. And also, Jennifer, would you provide me with your contact information, please? Thank you. That's it.
Okay, I'm sure she can send you an email. She has all of our emails. Is MDA on the call?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, hey, Rachel. So can you just talk about MDA's process as it relates to, I guess, less about commercial and more about like the localized kind of backyard flock?
Sure. So, the main reason why we require a backyard flock registration or, any type of poultry operation to be registered is because of incidents like HPAI. The reason we require it is so that we have people's contact information. We have an idea of what kind of poultry operation they have in the event that there's some sort of public emergency so that we know how to notify people. And so that's really the primary reason why we do it. And so with that being said, we simply ask that the site be registered. And so when someone registers their flock with us, they are only required to provide the name or the address of the premises, what kind of contact is, contact phone number, what kind of operation it is. So again, whether or not it's an egg layer operation or a production unit, and alternative phone numbers. Those are the only pieces of information we require them to provide. So we don't ask how many roosters you have. We don't ask how many hens. Those are not questions that we don't track that information.
Would you,
I know that
should you?
we could, and I mean, those are things that could change based on the type of operation. We could track that information. And then what I think one of our questions is, and we did discuss this with the sponsors and with the advocates last year, is that the intent of the bill is animal welfare. It's to crack down on cockfighting operations. But and from our perspective as an agency, based on what we do as an agency and what our capacity is, we don't specialize in animal welfare per se. We specialize in making sure that diseases do not spread throughout the animal population, throughout the agricultural industry in the state of Maryland. And so local law enforcement already handles animal welfare concerns. And so I understand that the bill has been modified this year to say that no additional inspections would be required by MDA. And so let's say we register and we do require folks to say how many roosters versus how many hens or what breed of the bird. Because like I said, none of that is information that we currently track for backyard flocks. And so if we were to add that information to the registration, and then someone tells us a number that's different from the allowable amount per acre, are we to then report them to law enforcement or notify them that they're not allowed to have that many? Because from our perspective, this has always been an animal welfare, animal control, law enforcement issue. And so I think we're trying to understand how the Department of Agriculture, if we're not doing inspections, we're uncertain of why we have jurisdiction or why we're being given jurisdiction over this.
So I guess to follow up with that is your database of who has even registered with you, whether they're commercial or residential, is that a publicly accessible database?
No.
Okay. So so let's say you did start to collect this information about who has how much of what and where. If I am law enforcement and I potentially need that information, again, I live somewhere, maybe I'm not required to register for the local level, but I'm required to register for the state. Could they ask for that information? Would they have to like PIA for that information? Could they get that information from you to figure out who's where? And then they can do a potential investigations and enforcements from there. Because I think I do agree with you, but it doesn't sound like there's enough of a mechanism or process either locally or at the state level to be able to gather this information, to be able to then check on certain places, see where the gaps are, and then potentially open it up to where this could be occurring.
I'd agree with you there. So based on how we do things now, right, and this is similar to what we discussed about nutrient management plans in the soil conservation districts.
Yes.
MDA does its best to protect the information of of farmers and what's happening on people's private property. The same way a regular homeowner would want to protect, their private property and wouldn't want information about what they do on their property shared publicly. And so currently, unless the bill is going to be amended to specify it, then yes, law enforcement would have to submit a PIA if we were to start collecting that information. Any data that we collect on folks that we register for different licenses, that's information that stays in-house.
So, and then lastly, is it generally understood, I think, across the state, that if I decide I want chickens or roosters and my jurisdiction doesn't have it, that I would know whoever I buy these chickens from, these roosters from, that I would then have to register them with the state? And then vice versa, if I get a permit, if I have a licensing or a permitting process locally, I'm somehow informed that I then have to register with the state. Do you know that?
I don't know how the jurisdictions do it. I don't know if they notify people, and I actually don't know if retailers share with folks that they are selling chickens or chicks to that they're required to register a flock. I'm not certain of that. I know that we do our best to educate and put out press releases and social media posts and share with folks that they're required to, but we don't know that it's generally understood, as you all, may have learned from the HPAI briefing where there was a question about that. While we have over 8,000 backyard flocks registered, we know there are more that are unregistered, but we don't know necessarily how to reach people who don't know that they're supposed to be registered.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I wanted to ask Jennifer, first of all, if you know how many localities have a requirement for registration and how people would know if they have to register. Is there the question that was just asked about that?
Thank you. And I apologize because we had hoped to get this information to the subcommittee in advance of tonight, but it proved very hard to find because a lot of it was trying to prove a negative. Certainly in urban areas, College Park, Baltimore City, it's easy to find the chicken ordinances. Roosters are generally prohibited. It's fairly clear cut. In counties with a large urban or suburban area like Howard, it's very clear what the zoning prohibitions and the rooster and chicken prohibitions are for the suburban parts of the county. But I actually was unable to even verify the sort of rooster rules for where I live in Howard County. And then so the more rural counties, we weren't able to find a lot of sort of data that we felt we could send to the subcommittee and say this is the permit for the county. And I will say, from an incredibly unscientific hour spent at Southern States, because they have their chick days are coming and my kids are planning which chicks they want to get this year. People don't realize. I asked the people coming in and talking about getting chickens this year, do you know you're supposed to register with the state? And lots of conversations ensued that are for another day, but this is our concern about tying it to registration. It's a simple form to submit that doesn't really tell us about the property or about what's on the property. And also a lot of people who just are your backyard, I've got a couple chickens to lay eggs, aren't aware of where these laws are. I think we heard from our law enforcement partners that focusing on, and we're happy to define it and put space requirements around it as Delegate Baker suggested, but focusing on, I hate to say it, it's a bit like porn. When our local animal control officers hit a scene, they know it's breeding for cockfighting just because of the way the birds are maintained, the way that the property is. And so focusing on sort of the common elements that only a game yard breeding operation would have, as opposed to the registration, is going to get us, I do believe, closer to being able to identify these properties and allow our local law enforcement to act, which is all they're asking for, sort of a statewide ability to act when they see these suspected bad actors.
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry. I just don't understand why the animal control in local jurisdictions, with the exception, I guess, those that don't have it, don't have a mechanism locally to monitor what should and should not be there. That is what I've struggled with. Delegate Ruth.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to, if I could follow up with Delegate Jacobs and find out, given that there seems to be this mishmash of local laws and it's hard to even find out the local laws, how, if you could clarify your thoughts about registration versus not registration.
Well, I think those who would be reluctant to register would be one telltale sign that there's probably something going on there. But, we've been doing as much as we can, especially during this recent outbreak of avian flu to get these backyard flocks registered. And some tested positive, and I think that information is useful.
So
But also, and I also want to say that I agree with Delegate Boyce that, enforcement in the rural counties, and you got an animal issue going on, they don't call the police, they call animal control, and that's who comes in and kind of takes charge of the situation, whether it's, a dog, a cat, or a fox, or whatever, chickens, whatever it is. I mean, they should probably be more tuned into this and maybe getting their thoughts on the best way to handle this. But I think we're at a good crossroad right now that to register all these backyard flocks. They should be almost mandatory. Because we're really lucky that it hasn't gotten worse than it has with this, severity of these cases around the state. And we have had quite a few backyard flocks that tested positive too. So that's my reason for it.
Anything else, Delegate Ruth?
Not at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Ziegler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree. This is a good excuse to register backyard flocks. Let's do it because of the bird flu issue. But it seems to me that if law enforcement knows this when they see it, isn't there some way for us to give them discretion or just an opportunity? I hate to let this go because not only is it just horrifically cruel, but it's also just a gateway to so much other crime. I mean, these are not good. We don't want these operations. These are not a good thing. And I feel like we've got to be able to give law enforcement the tools to go in and, take down something. Because like I say, they know it when they see it.
No, I certainly agree. Again, I just don't understand in general, locally, or to your point, if you do see it, if you're saying you don't have enough I guess legislative backup to then enforce once you see it. But I think the argument has been that it, in one way, one group is saying it looks a certain way, and other folks are saying what it may look like, it may not be. And so it becomes hard because I could be judging a book by its cover, or not. And so it just feels hard to quote unquote kind of draw that straight line. And I think I do agree. I'm going to keep saying this, and somebody can beat me over the head. Is that I think we need to really be talking about registration locally, and do something to say, if you're not registered locally, if your local jurisdiction does not have a licensing or a permitting or registration, that you definitely have to do it with the state. And if you done it with your local jurisdiction, you have to register with the state. And then we have to somehow, and I know MDA doesn't want to hear this, but then somehow making that information readily available upon request from animal control to enforce. And that is just, those are just my happy thoughts.
Madam Chair.
Delegate, yes, still former delegate, yes.
It's okay.
Rachel, I'm sorry.
Thank you. It's okay. I just want to clarify. So currently, by law, people are already required to register backyard flocks. I just want to reiterate that that's already a requirement in law. It's already in Agricultural Article 3-804. It's just the whatever percentage that we can't even quantify. We don't know how many people are unregistered that don't know they're supposed to be. But there's already a requirement So yeah. And so if you wanted MDA to collect additional information and provide that to law enforcement so that they can do what they do, on the enforcement side, then, we could add additional requirements of what data has to be provided. But then again, law enforcement would still have to PIA us for that information. And perhaps you could consider a requirement for retailers who sell chickens to, private citizens to notify them that they have to register.
Or they would have to submit
Have
some
some
type of
signage.
purchase log saying that they sold X amount to X amount of persons. I think the thing that we need, and I asked for it last year, I didn't get it. We're asking for it again this year. We need to get it, or I don't see this bill moving, is we need additional information. We need to know what jurisdictions register or license backyard flocks. We do. We need that information. I mean, I can Google all day long. I can get an intern. I can get to Google, but we do need that information because I'm going to push it. I will be the only one here who thinks it, and that is fine. But I do think we need some type of registration process that closes the loophole, that gets enforcement what they need. I think it's Delegate Baker, then Delegate Ziegler, then Delegate Ruth.
Yes, this is for Rachel. To register your flock, is there a cost to that?
No, I don't believe so. It's not that there's a cost, it's just you're required to register them. So we don't charge a fee for people to register that. So no.
Okay, because that's going to be one of my concerns if we have to start paying a lot of money to register our chickens. And I know you see the price of chicken eggs, but once
Registration is free.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Voluntary. Required, but still voluntary. Who was next? Delegate Ziegler, I think you were next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I ask a question of Jennifer Bevan-Dangle?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So I'm now completely confused. What specifically don't we have now? Why can't we say this looks like a rooster breeding, cockfighting breeding operation, we're shutting it down?
Thank you, because I do feel like because of the bill's focus on these numeric limits, it's taken us in a different direction. The conversation with our local animal control officers was, where are we failing to crack down on cockfighting? The laws around cockfighting, if they are fighting on scene or if paraphernalia, the spurs, the other pieces are on scene, then it's very easy to take action. But what the sort of smart people in this industry have done is they're just breeding and they're part of this criminal enterprise, but they're not fighting on scene. So our ACOs can come to a property, they can see the tethers, they can see the dog houses, they can see how these roosters are maintained. But because there's no law that says you can't have these roosters in this manner, they can't take action because the breeders have gotten smart enough not to have the paraphernalia, not to have that fighting ring. And so they're able to be under that radar. And so this really came from local animal control officers saying our hands are tied. How can we go after these individuals where the property, it's very clear to us what they're doing, but there's no cause of action. There's no law that allows us to come on. And that's really what this was trying to solve.
Delegate Ruth, I'm sorry, Delegate Ziegler, are you finished? You have more?
I'm sorry, no.
Okay, Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so first of all, I really feel like if we're starting to add all these requirements of registration and PIA, it adds a lot of complexity and weight to the bill, where the animal control officers are pretty clearly saying they know it when they see it, and they just need a law to be able to, to identify, to be able to charge, or I'm sorry, I'm not saying it right, but
you are saying it right. You're fine.
Thank you.
Well, it sounds like it's the word may be probable cause. Like we need probable cause, and this bill would help establish that, if I'm using the term correctly. But I think there are discussions that this potentially doesn't get to probable cause. Whether it's the number or the quote unquote enclosure that might not get to quote unquote probable cause enough for local animal welfare to be able to then swoop in and be like, we have probable cause. We saw this, we saw that, we saw chains, we saw X, therefore we can go in to, I guess, kind of catch it when they see it versus know it and try to catch it later, but then don't have that kind of, probable cause. You got more hearsay, although it's actually happening. Rachel.
Yes, thank you. And Delegate Ruth, I think we completely agree with you. Which is why, again, I think we initially thought it would be more appropriate for this to be in the criminal law article instead of the agriculture article, because we're not certain. Again, this is under law enforcement's purview. And if so, all they need is, language to give them, more clear authority. We're not certain why MDA has to be involved.
Very interesting. So we have some work to do on this, to continue talking on this. So we are going to, if there's any other questions, any other thoughts, anything else to inject here, we are going to move to the last bill of the evening, if that is okay. Thank you, Jennifer, for being here and explaining this so thoroughly, and thank you, Rachel, for being here and assisting. We're going to go to HB 717, the Natural Resources Public Land Acquisition, Staffing, Operations, and Funding. Yes, that is Kristen.
Yeah, so this is there's various components in this bill that's relating to managing, operating, and acquiring public lands. I don't know how the best way to go through this. There was a reprint that was handed out with the department's amendments. I mean, if we could I could go through the different components just as they stand, or we could go through the reprint, by the pages in that order. I'm not sure if you have a preference.
Well, because it is late and we want to be efficient on time, can we go through and everyone should have gotten it because you got an update to your calendar, the reprint for the amendments that DNR submitted, which I know was like a whole during committee was like about 2 or 3 pages that were going to be just deleted to begin with. So that may take it down a bit. Do you want to share your screen, Chris?
Sure, I can do that.
Meredith, you can give her the ability to share her screen, please.
Kristen, you should be able to now.
Okay, thank you. I need to pull it up. All right. So the first 6 pages or so is relating to the state's public ethics laws. The bill is authorizing the department to create affiliated foundations to support the public lands and operations. And in those provisions, it indicates that a DNR official or employee that the conflict of interest provisions of the Maryland public ethics laws do not prohibit a DNR official or employee from also becoming a director or official of an affiliated foundation. And that's still later in the bill, but the Public Ethics Commission was saying we did not need to make those changes in the public ethics statute. And that's consistent with how other affiliated foundations are in law. So that's what the striking of the language is for the page on pages 2 through 6. Then we get to page 8, I think. So on page 8 relates to budget requests for positions to manage and administer new real property. The bill requires DNR, after acquiring a real property interest, to include in its annual budget request to DBM a request for funds to create a new permanent classified positions to manage and administer the real property. This request must be based on certain data and calculated using a ratio of at least 1 permanent classified position per 400 acres of newly acquired real property interests. The department submitted an amendment to indicate that these are talking about fee interests, fee simple interests, and not conservation easement interests. See my notes. Okay, so on page 10, after line 28, the department amendments adds language to say that certain provisions under current law relating to land exchange, that the department could not dispose of a conservation easement interest under those land exchange provisions. Pardon me for a second, I have to blow my nose. I have a cold, hold on. Sorry about that. And I guess I'm just going to roll through them all until, I guess, and then at the end, then you would take questions. Okay. And also on page 9 and 10, the bill is updating terminology under provisions that govern the department's acquisition of real property. In current law, there's references to land, and this is adding a definition of real property interest, which would include, it's back on page 8. It would include a fee simple acquisition interest, a conservation easement interest, or another perpetual easement interest. Skipping down to page 11, starting on line 4, this section is codifying the department's land and property management program. And this program would be responsible for processing lease agreements, easements, and other property-related documents, and facilitating issuing leases for department housing to department employees in accordance with the department's residential housing policy. Starting on line 17, this is authorizing the department to establish one or more affiliated foundations to work with the Maryland Park Service, the Maryland Forest Service, the Wildlife and Heritage Service, and the Office of Outdoor Recreation. There's, the provisions that establish that govern there's various provisions that are established in the bill that relate to the governing of these foundations. So the purpose of an affiliated foundation would be to solicit and accept funds, promote activities. There's information or provisions relating to, as we mentioned earlier, about how the conflict of interest provisions of the Maryland Public Ethics Law would not prohibit DNR or an employee from also becoming a director or official of an affiliated foundation. There's reporting requirements, and there's a requirement for audit. And then going to page 14, we get into the uses of the program open space funds. And this starts, so down in lines 26 through 30, this would authorize the governor to transfer a portion of program open space stateside funding for operational needs when that funding has at least $80 million of unencumbered funds. And this would be in cases where the department's existing special fund sources would be insufficient to cover existing salaries for permanent positions. On the bottom of page 15, these provisions relate to the local use of program open space funding. So this bill would increase, hold on. Well, it's in between two pages, but so the bill is increasing the amount of the local program open space local allocation that counties can use for development projects from 75% to 100% if they've met their land acquisition goals. Language is added to allow locals to use up to 100% of a prior apportionment that was not yet encumbered, their current apportionment, or a future annual apportionment for development projects. That's a very brief review of a bunch of different things that are happening with this bill.
Thank you, Kristen. I just want to be clear that one, DNR's goal is to create one foundation, although it could be many, and that foundation, they are mirroring the work of like the national parks, like their model, how they, I guess, have a foundation that supports national parks. It would be somewhat of the same foundation to support DNR with funding, gifts, so on and so forth, to have a board. And I think the other thing I wanted to point out was that I know there was some chest pains regarding program open space funds as it relates to a one-time potential use, and whether or not or how that money is reimbursed or put back. So I do want to talk through this bill. I see Delegate Ruth has her hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And actually, that was, I think, my question, that the authorization to transfer money from program open space, it's just the state funds, right? It doesn't touch the local funds.
That's how I remember it.
Thank you.
Yep, stateside, right? It's the stateside.
Yeah, that's correct. This is the stateside program open space. And it's when the balance is more than $80 million at the end of a fiscal year. And that it couldn't be reduced to, below that threshold either.
Delegate Otto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I with the, especially for the local part of this bill and setting up the foundation, I think that's all great stuff. I got a little concerned about how many new positions is this going to create with it? 1 per 400 acres, or is that when they acquire more land that would kick in, or?
That would kick in as they acquire. I believe the fiscal note might have projected projected 4 positions beginning in fiscal year 2027 for the budget request positions.
That part of it is my biggest concern, and as long as that whatever's over the $80 million is staying in the department to manage this ground and improve that, I'm good with that. But I don't want it swept to balance the general fund.
I think the idea is that money would come in then to fund those positions.
Yeah.
That would be requested.
Mhm.
And I guess this is 20, per my notes, it's just 20 million plus the pipeline listing of projects to meet their 2040 goal of acquisition. And so the question, and so again, the 80 million would be only for operating budget in the down fiscal years, I guess, but the question would be after and if the goal is met by 2040, would there be a requirement for more, or would they be done? I mean, that's something to think about as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Did I hear her say that this bill would result in four new positions? That would be for.
Right. So there's a provision in the bill that requires DNR to make a budget request at a rate of one new position for every 400 newly acquired acres of land. And yes, that would be expected to increase the number of positions as DNR acquires land in fee simple.
Okay, and also, is there a new fiscal note to be provided with the bill?
You mean the amendments that were offered by the department? I'm
yeah,
not
I don't
really
have-
sure. Yeah, I don't really know how much that would change.
Okay.
Other than there was a small piece, I think, with the State Ethics Commission that their $35,000 fiscal
Yep.
note would be reduced. But as far as the other provisions, I think the fiscal note would remain accurate. I'd have to look, at each component of the bill, but I don't think the amendments were reducing.
Yeah, because that would be important to
changing.
update if the fiscal note changes at all. And also there in that fiscal note, it talks about 2 merit positions.
What page, Delegate Baker?
Right on the front page of the fiscal note. Yeah. And if you read there on the fiscal summary, about 3
Sure.
sentences down off to the right, it talks about 2 merit
Yes.
positions.
So it says the budget also included, as introduced, includes 212,543 in special funds and 2 merit positions contingent on legislation that matches the description of one of the bill's provisions.
Could someone explain that to me?
I think it's basically, and I mean, I would defer to DNR, but I think that just goes to the fact that where this authorization allowing the POS states side money to support operating expenses when DNR's other special funds are insufficient to cover staffing needs. I think the anticipation is that these program open space funds would cover those positions.
What are those positions?
This was those are the ones that are resulting from the land and property management program that's being established in the bill, which is codifying a recent
So
program.
are we talking about 6 positions now? I don't understand what 2 merit positions would.
I think that's in addition to what they would have right now.
So that would be 6.
I'm not sure what they currently.
Okay, thank you.
We can check with
It's
Emily.
for a different program, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of what this goal of this is. My understanding is the goal of this legislation is to allow the department to work with a foundation, like the National Park Service does, to bring in more money to help fund these programs. So we're actually taking money off of the books and out of our state expenditures for Project Open Space if this is successful. And as I read it, and maybe I'm wrong, but as I read it, it's based upon the increase in staffing is tied to the amount of new projects that this initiative produces. Am I right about that?
I would agree, but I'm happy to also, if DNR is on the call, to have them check in as well. I mean, initially upon reading this bill, I saw it's a creation of a foundation, a group that can help manage kind of like the foundation arm of DNR, which the National Park Service also has. So it is setting it up to do so, but also, you know, pulling on using stateside program open space funds. Is DNR on the call still? I can't see with my
Yes, ma'am.
can we okay, can we stop share screen just so I can see it because I can't see everybody.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
No, sorry about that, Kristen.
I'm not quick on the trigger here. Hold on. There we go. It should be gone.
Oh, there's everybody. Yes, Emily, if you can answer some of the questions that have recently just come up.
Sure. So Delegate Foley is generally correct. Thank you. The bill does authorize us to establish affiliated foundations to help us to manage the lands that we have across the state, as she mentioned, similar to the National Park Service, you know, friends of groups and so forth. And they can be very helpful in trail clearing days and just different projects that are needed throughout our public spaces across the state.
There was a question about the positions and that the bill, trying to figure out, are we talking about 4 positions of which 2 are merit? Or are we talking about 4 new positions, and there's an additional 2 that are merit-based? So is it 4 positions or 6?
Well, the bill authorizes us to request 1 position per 400 new
acres.
Yeah, 400 new acres of acquired lands. I was trying to follow where in the fiscal note the question came up again.
Delegate Baker, if you can, because it was your question about the beginning of the fiscal note and the fiscal summary.
On the front page of the fiscal note, go down to fiscal summary, go down 3 lines all the way to the right.
Oh, okay.
Do you have the fiscal note page?
Hillary is on. Maybe she knows.
I've got it, Em.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
And I think it's further expanded upon on page 9 at the bottom.
Okay.
Here we go.
If I could, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Pedito.
So there's 2 elements to this. There are the potential new positions that only arise as we acquire new lands more than 400 acres. In the fiscal summary, that is referring to 2 positions. There's only 2 that would be used to establish the land and property management program. And that is a new program, arguably something that should have existed in DNR many, many years ago, specifically to oversee to provide oversight to our nearly 200 residential houses that reside on DNR public lands. That's sort of a thing that evolved over time that we now have taken a hard look at, and in no small way, sort of with the recognition that sometimes not the best things happen on our public lands as it relates to residential properties. So we're using this to tighten that up. We've created a new policy within the department as it relates to housing, and this team would oversee it, because the concern now is we've established that there's a lot of work to be done there. Again, 200 houses. We're one of the largest property managers in the state. The staff who are doing that work are doing that in addition to their duties in conservation and land acquisition and supporting our locals in their land acquisition and recreation goals. So We really need to develop, at this point, be a very small team of 2 people. But it's an important part of our portfolio going forward.
And those 2 people are the merit-based people you're talking about.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Okay. Delegate Baker, did that answer your question?
Trying to raise my hand again. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Somewhat, but I still don't understand what the definition of it's either 2 new positions, or are they taking 2 positions and giving them a merit pay increase? I don't know what I've never heard of merit
Merit-based is
positions.
like a skill-based position. It's a civil skill-based position. It just means that you're going to hire somebody who has the skill to do the job that will be more than likely a civil servant.
And will we see the salaries of those positions?
There is on the fiscal note, page 9. I think it gives, well, not really there is a budget request for the positions on page 9 of the fiscal note. Second part of the chart. Special fund positions new. It says for FY 2027, $378,000. And that's 4.
If I
Madam Chair.
I'm
sorry,
sorry.
go ahead, Kristen.
And actually, I think this is probably what Paul's going to get at, and and if you would like him to answer, that's fine. I just think it's important to remember that there's 2 different components to these new positions. One would be under the Land and Property Management Program. That would be the 2 merit positions, and then the other positions that are in that Exhibit 2, that would be in cases where the department is making the budget requests based on their acquisition of land, and that could potentially grow exponentially in the out years as the department acquires land in fee simple, and that's what the second line of Exhibit 2 is referring to. So there's 2 different areas that relate to positions.
And that the fiscal impact, if I could, Madam Chair, is
Yes.
For those 2 positions, the total fiscal impact is 212,543.
Yep.
Beginning in 26, and
Yep.
that is to be crystal clear. I know this. That is not 2 salaries. That is salaries plus fringe plus the computer we have to get them, et cetera. So
the 212 is 2 salaries plus
all the
benefits
fringe
plus.
and this, yep,
Okay.
setting them onboarding. So these are, kind of mid-level civil servant positions. And those are contingent on the rest of the elements of the bill. If we
Yes.
can't, if we don't get over the threshold, we won't be able to fill those.
So to Delegate Baker's point, so that we just have clarification, we are really talking about actually 2 positions. And as land is acquired, we could have 2, we could have 200 per every 400 acres purchased.
Yeah, 200 would be remarkable, because that would mean we've hit, the 800,000 acre mark, I think, if I'm doing the math right, but nonetheless, yes. We're looking at 2. That's the number that's implicated right now.
Okay, Delegate Baker, I'm just making sure you got that.
We're not voting on this bill tonight, are we?
Probably not. It will, maybe not. It depends on the will of the subcommittee, but if people aren't comfortable, we can certainly.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable. I would like to know. I'm going to have to spend some time on understanding.
Absolutely, you got a week.
Hiring 1 person per 400 acres. I can't understand that.
So the question should be, and then I'll let I want Delegate Jacobs and Delegate Ruth, because they've had their hand up. Because this is modeled, I'm assuming Hillary and Emily and Mr. Pedito, that this is a lot of this is modeled off of the National Park Services work? So I guess the question is like, where did the 400 acres per person come from? I'm sure it's some standard somewhere. It's not something you pulled out of the sky.
It's actually most substantially, the concept exists in other states, including our neighbors to the north in Pennsylvania. Every acquisition comes with an appropriation there. But the 400 number was actually born of the DLS required study from the Great Maryland Outdoors Act that all of you helped move and enact. So when they looked at when the Park Service was sort of at its optimal state, and they compared that to what we do today in terms of new acquisitions, new acres, number of personnel, and the math simply stands for the proposition that we're really we really should be acquiring those lands with new personnel at this 1 to 400 rate. And that was a year-long study. I know, Madam Chair, you participated in
Yes.
that, played an important role. So this was, this was not, a top-of-mind decision. This was part of
Yes.
a lengthy discussion. And
I just wanted to be, Mr. Petit, I just wanted to be clear for the rest of the folks here. So I appreciate that. Delegate Jacobs.
All right, so Paul, while you're on the screen there, every year it amazes me how much property is purchased through program open space, especially in my district. So the number of employees is based on say the last 4 years of land purchases would be how many? I mean, we don't know going forward, but we know going backwards over 4 years how much property's been purchased. So I'm just for a reference point, because
do you remember that?
You're talking about two employees. That's for the new system. That's the merit employees, but I'm talking about the 1 per 400. I think we can have a rough idea just based on however many years you want to look at. Because I know it's quite a bit of acreage is bought every year just in the 36th district.
Yeah, I'm going to try to get, let me see if, I know Hillary Bell, who's our Director of Land Acquisition, was on.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just trying to pull up. If you just give me 1 second, I can find that.
Okay.
I think it would be helpful in answering some of these questions.
If I could, while Hillary's looking at that, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that if you looked at so if we're talking about historical, I've had 30 years with the agency. I can tell you 20 years ago, we were at 275,000 acres. The number of pins or number of positions that we had to manage those acres has actually gone down through time. And that's across multiple administrations. So it's not a criticism of any particular administration. It's a fact. But in the meantime, on that same chart, the number of acres has gone up to over 500,000 acres.
Yeah.
So our management responsibility has grown to 500,000 acres, while the number of positions responsible on those 3 units of management, our state forest, state parks, and wildlife management areas, has flatlined or gone down about 1%.
30 years ago, you had 480 NRP officers too.
Well, but they were doing law enforcement, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That and now what do you have? 250 maybe?
270 something, but
yeah. So I'm saying, you're at half the force there as well. So that's just the nature of the agency right now. But I'm just talking. There's been a lot of questions about this 1 per 400, and I'm just trying to maybe a rough number of what we've done in previously might help.
I can answer that if that's okay.
Yes, please, Hillary.
So since fiscal 2019, we've acquired a little over 8,700 acres. So that's about 1,500 acres per year. So that's the last 6 years.
So you're talking.
I would estimate between 1,500 and 2,000 a year would be a
So you're
good
talking
average.
3.5 to 4 people per year.
Yes, and again, the bill just requires that the department requests those positions. It still would have to go through the whole budget process before
Yeah, I
we're,
understand, but it answers the question of, just how many people we're talking about. So you have a 4-year, 8,700 acre number to work with. And so, realistically, if you acquired the same going forward, you're talking 3 to 4 per year.
Per year. Yep.
Would you agree with that?
Well, that's what the math says. I don't
Well,
think
that's
it
what I'm
needs to-
saying.
I mean, 1,500 is 3.75 people a
Right.
year, so 3.25 people. So yes, we're looking at three people per year. If the average is about 1,500 acres
Right.
per
That's-
year.
So
Yeah.
I'm Madam Chair, I can't vote on that bill tonight because it's got too many moving
That's
parts.
fine. That's
So
fine.
I just want to let you know before you
I
get too
appreciate
far,
you.
before you go down the road too far.
Yes, sir.
Thank
I'm
you.
hungry, but go ahead.
I didn't eat lunch either.
I hear you. I hear you, buddy. Are you finished? Can I call on Delegate Ruth? Delegate Ruth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Paul, I just wanted to go back to the land and property management program and the two positions there. So if I understand right, this is sort of related to the situation at Gunpowder Falls State Park where we're looking to formalize a property management program to avoid any kind of abuses of authority going forward.
That's correct, Delegate. Yeah, that's a terrible part of our history, but it is history. And one of the first things we did as a new DNR was we acknowledged that and we leaned hard into it. And we set up a new policy that eliminates the capacity. One of the most important parts of it is it eliminates the capacity for any individual area manager to decide who gets to stay in those homes and sort of the terms and conditions. Because that, as you might imagine, could be a very powerful tool for someone in a position of power already over subordinates. So we took that away. We stood up a policy. We now have a committee, 3 assistant secretaries, assistant attorney general, Office of Fair Practices, who reviews each of those houses with our engineering team. And now we're getting to the point where we're standing up those houses as potential opportunities for tenants. And that's where we're running into the harsh reality that we're not set up to manage 200 residential homes. And that's what these two positions would do.
Thank you.
I'll give Hillary credit. She's basically doing this, in addition to trying to meet the 40 by 40 goals.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Any other clarifications? Any other? Delegate Baker?
Oh my. Okay, so you talked about I thought you said 200 prop residents. Is that what you said?
That is what he said, yes.
So we would be collecting they would be paying rent.
So it depends. Some of these will be operational homes. So those are places on facilities where we determine, again, at a high level at the department, we determine it's in the department's best interest and the state's best interest that we have a current employee in there who basically serves as the eyes and ears at a particular facility to help us monitor after hours and frankly avoid anything that nefarious activities that might occur when we don't have someone there during regular business hours.
Delegate Baker, you have additional questions?
Well, I do, but
yeah, you can. It's the time. This is what we get
is there any data
elected to do.
Any data available on possible amounts of income that you would generate from these 200 properties minus the homes that would be occupied by employees helping to monitor the properties?
There are, part of our process was to engage Department of General Services, and they're about halfway through. They've been doing appraisals for us, and They've appraised every one of those they will appraise every one of those residences and then re-up those appraisals every 3 years as part of the new policy. These are generally fairly, I would say, nominal potential income sources because these tend to be older homes that need a fair amount of maintenance. And so think, $1,200 a month in rent. And that's where we're trying to make a decision. Is it in the state's best interest to have an operational employee in there who can, in part, maintain the home and more importantly, monitor the facility in the area that's around them against, trying to manage, 100 new tenants who don't work for the department. Because they work for us, they tend to be better tenants. Subject to a whole bunch of rules, right? There's IRS, DGS, and now DNR rules that they have to comply with to be an operational tenant. So I would not look at this as a source of significant income. I think that's where we're really looking at sort of the bigger facilities, right? We have a casino as a tenant. That's where we look to make revenue.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I think
Thanks, Paul.
just to finish up Delegate Baker's point is that when you're looking at these 200 residences and you have staff in them, you have somebody there, not only visible, but can also maintain the property. So maybe they're paying for their own electricity and utilities, maintaining the property
I get
in
that.
exchange for being an employee, but potentially not paying rent. Mr. Petito? Okay. So it's not totally free, to a
And
degree.
indeed, if it's over the $1,500 threshold, if that's what DGS says the house should rent for, they pay the delta between that $1,500 average and the appraised rental amount. In addition to doing all the duties they would otherwise be required.
Okay. Any other questions? We will hold this for next week so people can read through it, and then hopefully, upon looking at it again, we can potentially move the bill. Any other questions? Any other concerns? Any other comments? Can I have a motion to adjourn? So moved. Good night, and thank you guys. Good work.